Let's now turn to Russia's war in Ukraine. Latest reports say 440 graves have been discovered in the Ukrainian city of Izyum. This discovery is provoking deeper investigations of havoc the Russian invasion may have caused in Ukraine. Now, this is not the first time a mass grave will be discovered in Ukraine, but Russia has repeatedly denied being behind their existence.
Ukraine says it has evidence of a mass grave in Izyum, the northeastern city recently freed from Russian occupation. Regional police head Volodymyr Timoshko told reporters that more than 400 bodies were thought to have been buried there. Ukraine and its Western allies previously accused Russian troops of war crimes, an allegation Moscow has denied repeatedly. It is not yet clear what happened to the victims, but some accounts have suggested that many have died from bombing and a lack of access to health care. There are also signs that some of the graves could belong to Ukrainian soldiers. The regional head says exhumation would begin immediately to get a clearer picture of the number of victims in the city, which was under Russian occupation for more than 5 months. In his nightly address, President Zelensky said more clearly verified information will be presented to Ukrainian and foreign journalists. He added that Ukraine wants the world to know what is really happening and what the Russian occupation has led to. He emphasized that from Bucha to Mariupol and now Izyum, mass graves have been discovered in Ukraine. The Ukrainian leader was referring to alleged mass graves found this spring in Bucha, near the capital Kyiv, and also near Mariupol, the key southeastern Ukrainian port now occupied by Russian troops. Much of Izyum lies in ruins, with one local politician telling reporters that up to 80% of the town's infrastructure has been destroyed and bodies are still being discovered in the rubble.
And joining me now from Washington, D.C. to discuss the situation in Ukraine is a global affairs analyst, Calvin Dark. Good to have you join us.
Good to be here.
So, Calvin, this is not the first time that mass graves have been reported in Ukraine. If you remember earlier on, a mass grave was also reported in Bucha of about 458 bodies. Now, do you think that this perhaps is a tip of the iceberg in terms of what Ukraine will find as it continues to reclaim cities?
Yes, I think the discovery of these mass graves is just a reminder of what we've known, that this Russian invasion in Ukraine is horribly inhumane and cruel. And so I don't think anyone was surprised, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's just incredibly cruel. And I do think that this marks a turning point in the conflict, because the discovery of this mass grave has really affected international opinion that was already against Russia and promoting Ukraine for the most part.
And I know that, there is really little or no access to this kind of territories at this moment because of what is going on there. But, just judging by what we've seen or what we've heard being reported so far, how bad do you think that the war crimes and atrocities committed there are?
I think they're probably pretty significant and probably worse than what we can imagine, those of us, who aren't in Ukraine. I know whenever I hear statements from the president of Ukraine and their government, and, they talk about the numbers and the atrocities, you always keep in mind that obviously it's to their benefit to present the worst of the conflict. But I think in this case, this actually might not even be the worst that we're seeing. Now, what I'm interested in is how this affects Putin, because obviously, things are restricted in Russia and not all Russians are being able to see this as we are, but I'm sure some of the news of this is getting out to them. How does this make him react, and how does this affect his leadership and power?
I think Ukraine is now investigating about 21,000 war crimes. We know that the International Criminal Court, that's the ICC, has sent the largest team ever to assist with investigations there. And ICC has called Ukraine a crime scene. But both Russia and Ukraine are not members of the ICC. So one wonders, how do you investigate without jurisdiction?
Well, with the ICC, that's always been a problem, the jurisdiction and, accepting whatever it says and does and investigates and if there are any rulings. I do think, though, this does help Ukraine in that it raises the profile of the atrocities that we were talking about, so that even if it doesn't end up having legal strength as enforcement, it does have great power for public opinion when you highlight these atrocities that are happening.
And there are also other countries, I think about 45 of them now coming together to share resources and information in terms of investigations into those war crimes. There are also other multiple groups, the United Nations being one of them, also investigating war crimes in Ukraine. But when you look at all of this, again, jurisdiction will be a problem. So what sort of instruments do you think are available to keep Russia accountable if need be?
I think keeping Russia accountable is going to be difficult. I think where the focus should be is ending this conflict. Winter is coming, for a Game of Thrones reference, and that's going to affect Europe a lot. It's going to affect the global markets a lot. And I think that all of these measures, obviously the military efforts on the ground, but also these investigations, the international community coming in to investigate and try to hold Russia accountable, all of that contributes to hopefully bringing this to an end before winter. And I think that's what everybody's main goal is, at least everybody but Russia's and some other folks. And
Russia seems to be quite silent on these allegations, but Russia has always denied that it has anything to do with these mass graves that have been discovered. But I just want to take a comment from President Putin when he attended the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Uzbekistan. And he said that, I'm trying to quote him correctly, he said, he hailed the growing influence of new centers of power who cooperate with each other without any sort of competition and all of that. But when you look at the leaning towards China, does that also make it difficult to hold Russia accountable if it continues to get that kind of support from China, especially the President Xi Jinping?
Well, I do think that does show that Putin understands the strategic advantage to increasing relations with China. And it's no doubt that those increasing relations will make ending this conflict and holding Russia accountable more difficult. However, what we also have to keep in mind is China is not going to damage themselves, their economy, just to help Russia. I think there's a limit to that because we also have to remember China has its own relations with the world. And so I think it represents that Putin is looking for allies, but I also think that the way he and China have painted it, they painted it a little bit more positive or effective than it actually really can be.
The president of China, Xi Jinping, has not outrightly condemned the war, but he has continued to support Russia in terms of his security guarantees, saying that Russia should get security guarantees. Xi Jinping will be running for a third term. He's bound to have it. He's looking for political ground standing in his own country. How far do you think he would go in his support of Russia?
I think we're kind of seeing the limits as far as he'll go, because keep in mind, he could have, recently and also for the last 6 months, been a lot more aggressive in his speaking and support of Russia. But he hasn't, because one of the things that he has to keep in mind is that he can't let the Chinese economy and China's relationships with other countries in the world, including the United States, suffer to die on this hill with Russia. So while there are definite advantages to a cooperation with Russia, there are limits. And that's why I think he's going to be very careful. He's not going to go all the way, as I'm sure Putin would have wanted to.
And how far do you think the West will always go? I think you were speaking to the issues of Russian gas earlier, and you referenced Game of Thrones where you said winter is coming. And really, as winter comes, we know that the West and Europe would need gas in terms of energy to stay warm. We've started to see some dissenting voices. I always reference Hungary, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, who seems to be tired of the intervention at this moment. Do you think that we're going to see more dissenting voices in Europe and the West?
Yes, I think we're going to see two voices. I think we're going to see dissenting voices of people saying, we've given this too long. We've given all the support we can to Ukraine. We have to move on. We have to look at our individual countries' best interests. Then you have the other argument, which I think is more on the U.S. side, where they obviously don't want, the United States, don't want this to be a difficult winter for our European allies. And I think the United States will do what it could to stop that. However, the United States is not willing to give up this to Putin, because that could turn into a lot of other things if they're not able to stop him from this land grab and this war that has gone on longer than anybody thought it would.
Thank you so much for talking to us. We'll see how much these investigations go and what they would find eventually. Thank you so much for talking to us, Calvin Duck.
Thank you.